out there is doing well. I am so very excited to have this conversation today with Dr. Ed Tori. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort of put out some information today that's going to really, I think, elevate the conversation beyond the normal approaches to solving one's immigration issue. Many folks out there are in situations where they might be in a very stressful scenario, in a visa backlog with delays, and they might have children who are aging out, becoming close to age 21, and sort of living in this sort of stressful kind of legal status, while at the same time having an extremely successful professional pursuit and professional career. So this sort of dichotomy is quite unique, I think, and that's why I asked a person who is a mentor of mine and a person who I've learned a great deal from in this space of influence. And Dr. Ed Tori has been advising thought leaders for a long time, and is a public speaker in terms of providing sort of influence and coaching. And I wanted to sort of have this conversation with him about what we could do to help folks who are in this like immigration related scenario, and how we can kind of elevate that conversation. So Dr. Tori, could you take a minute just to introduce yourself and just talk to the audience a little bit so they know who you are?
Sure. My name is Ed Tori. I am a physician originally by training, but I've over the past 22 or 23 years have developed an expertise in influence, persuasion, body language, rapport, and behavior change. And the way I did that was actually through a series of sort of like apprentice type relationships with experts in the space. Each year, I picked a different discipline and I went to study from it. And so I learned from marketers. I've learned from direct response copywriters. Those are people who write persuasive type writing. 7 ways to six-pack abs without leaving your desk. You won't believe number 3. I've learned from hypnotists, hypnotherapists, stage performers. So from multiple different disciplines. When I wanted to understand faces and the body language of faces, I studied from caricature artists and facial profilers and those sort of things, just so that I can understand each of these different disciplines. When I wanted to understand attention and how attention is can be addressed, I studied from magicians, because they tend to kind of hack attention for their performances. So essentially, I've learned from multiple different disciplines, and for a while, I brought that back to healthcare at the bedside to help with patient experience and rapport at the bedside manner. I've also brought it to different types of organizations where I will help with toxic cultures. If there's departments that aren't getting along, or something within a department, I might be called in to help with some of that. And I've been consulted within healthcare and outside of healthcare in a vast number of departments, everything from philanthropy to bring in more donors, to finance and revenue cycle, to malpractice cases, and helping people through the entire life cycle of a claim, because that can be quite it can be an emotional roller coaster. So how do you manage through all of that? And I think that's where it comes to bear here in a big way, Sharif, is that there's not just the process you're going through for the sake of the immigration, the process, but there's also, as you mentioned, there's the career that you're still trying to maintain. There are all the relationships you have at home, with family, with friends, with colleagues, and community. And sometimes in moments of high stress, we put some of those in jeopardy. And so it comes to wherever there are humans, influence is part of the equation. And so one of the things about influence is that it's always there. It's never not there. It's just you're doing it well or not so well. You're doing it optimally or you're doing it not so optimally. Every time you send an email, every time you read an email, even when you read it, there's influence at play. You may read it, interpret it in a certain way, and you trigger, you have a certain emotional response. So it literally comes in wherever there is human-human interaction, human-human communication. So
Indeed,
in a nutshell.
indeed, and I think that in if we're looking at like self petition scenario, so a lot of our audience have situations where they want to take matters into their own hands. They don't want to continuously be dependent on their employers. So what they do is they undertake this self petition process, and part of that self petition process is to persuade the reader, who's ultimately the government adjudicator or judge that's going to decide the matter regarding the case. And one thing I've always tried to do is maintain, authenticity in evidence rather than sort of follow a superficial approach that I have seen, many people, I would say, maybe duped into. But there tends to be like a very low approval rating in some of the particularly like EB1A for within the Indian community. And so one of the ways I've always thought about putting forward a case is, what can I do to make the adjudicator stop? Meaning they have a job of just putting myself in their shoes. They have a job of reviewing these massive petitions. Sometimes they could be, 2,000 pages of evidence. Of course, there's an executive summary and a legal brief, but, really they have a lot of evidence to go over. So how can we position our cases, and how can our clients and audience members who might even be doing this on their own, how can we position our cases in such a way that will make the adjudicator stop and listen? Because I think too often, they're sort of, not reviewing or not actually looking at the documentation.
Mhm. Yeah. So you have to account for one of the things that you just said is imagine what it's like in their day to day. I don't know how they sit down to review things. Are they looking at things on a screen? Are they reviewing papers, physical paper? But in any case, they're turning page after page after page after page. And the more you do that thing, page after page after page after page, that's what we call a pattern.
Mhm.
And so that pattern, as that they look at, not only are they looking at all these pages, many of these pages look very similar. They're the same format, they're the same structure, they're similar headings, they're similar. Everything looks the same. And so, how do you stand out? Well, when you have a pattern where something is the same again and again and again, what we refer to in influence is something called a pattern interrupt. A pattern interrupt is when you break a pattern, people snap to attention. So, all of us have been, let's say driving down the street. You're driving, on a highway and you're going somewhere. You don't even really remember the trip, right? Until you arrive. Unless an animal runs out in front or a car suddenly stops. That interrupts the pattern where you were kind of just in a daze and now you snap to attention. All of a sudden, you're fully aware of your surroundings. That is essentially what you need to do when somebody is in this rote pattern of seeing something that looks the same, looks the same, looks the same. And so sometimes, so how you phrase things, maybe there's a small adjustment you can make to titles and headings. In fact, if you talk to the discipline, the direct response copywriters, those are folks that write persuasive writing to get people to take an action, right? So if you're standing in line at the grocery store, and I alluded to this in the intro, if you're standing in line at the grocery store and you look over and you see a magazine that says 7 ways to six-pack abs without leaving your desk, you won't believe number 3. What just happened? See, you're standing in line and you don't have time because you're next. But that headline, and by the way, that is what they call it, a headline. It's not an article title. It's a headline because it's designed just to get your attention. Once it has your attention, it's removed your objections. Your objections are, I don't have time because I'm next in line. But 7 ways to six-pack abs without leaving your desk? And you won't believe number 3? Well, I have time to look up number 3. What's number 3? Or it's only 7. It's a short list. Let me just skim it.
Yeah.
That's why that's there. That's there so that it can grab attention, remove objections, and then get the person to take the action you want. And so this is why Cosmopolitan, National Enquirer, they're still in print. Everything else is going out of print, but they're still in print because they have these direct response copywriters. Now, my point here in bringing them up is not that you need this clickbait kind of material that you put there. No way. You can't break the pattern so much that it's like out of the domain.
Loses credibility.
Yeah, you can't lose credibility with it. But at the same time, you do have to recognize that title or that sort of a header on the paragraph is a headline, and it needs to grab attention. The other thing is, if you take into account, and this also comes from direct response copywriting, but I've also studied it with eye tracking studies when we look at different documents. If you track where people's eyes go when they read a long document, especially if it's a document that's similar to all the other documents they've read, they skim. And they skim in a very specific pattern. The pattern is they read the heading or header, then they read the first line of each paragraph in an F pattern. So they read the first one, they read the second one, and then it starts to trail off. They don't read as much of the next, and then sometimes they read the bottom. So it's F. So the first line of each paragraph is really important. Also, have you ever opened up an email where it's like, you receive an email and you open it, but then all of a sudden it's this big block of text, like almost like they vomited a bunch of text on the screen. When you receive an email like that and you're busy, what do you do?
Especially after AI, right? Generative text. I mean, exactly. I'm getting these emails. People are just a huge, unthoughtful, blob of text. I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to read this. I'm sorry.
With all this filler stuff in there, like it's just not. So you have to break that pattern. And so, but when people first, if you open up an email and it's all this text right there, guess what? What do most people do? They put, they mark as unread and save for later, and then they never come back to it. So your emails can't be like that. Your documents can't be like that. It has to stand out. It has to interrupt the pattern. And so this is really important. And so there's a saying in direct response copywriting: the first 10 words are more important than the next 10,000. The first 10 words are more important than the next 10,000. And so when you have an experienced attorney like yourself, as you're preparing the documents, you put things in a very deliberate order. Just like somebody who's preparing for trial, they choose who's going first, and who they do a deposition of first, all that stuff. They do all that.
And
very
one thing
deliberately.
I think one thing that we do is, and again, a lot of credit goes to you and kind of, I've been a student of this through you, and I definitely encourage other people to reach out and kind of get that knowledge. But even putting, every case is different, right? Like every scenario is different. I think taking that uniquely tailored approach to every scenario is going to matter a lot, and be thoughtful and be part of that pattern interruption that you talked about. Because if, for example, there's a one size fits all sort of template approach to every single case, then they're all going to sort of mix in with one another. We're not going to be highlighting the strengths. We're not going to be knowing what to point them to. Somebody who's a scientist are doing, somebody doing scientific research, like their publication record or citation record might be really important to their case. But someone who's basically a technology developer, or somebody in the energy engineer is not going to have that same kind of emphasis on those sort of research related findings. So just figuring out, I think, where to go with different aspects of a particular case, I find is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, also think about this from the side of the reviewer, right? The person who's reviewing it, what you would really love for them to experience, and you have to think about what's their experience on the other end. If they're going through and they're reading, your story, it should grab them. It should be like, wow, this person is really remarkable. I mean, the whole thing is extraordinary ability, right? Like that's what you're looking for. It should feel extraordinary. It should feel like, wow, this is really remarkable. Like what you want is them to go home and sit at the dinner table and just, I read a petition for somebody that, like, here's what they're doing. Like, thank God somebody's working on this. right?
Yes.
That's what you want. If you have that sort of thing and you package the story in a way, this is why you have to beware of scripts and templates, because they will all start to look the same and it will not show your story. And the other thing about templates is that they often, this is again, patterns and pattern interrupts. Patterns, they templates often have the same pattern all the way through, but a story never does. A story always varies. It goes up, it goes down, it has highs, it has lows, it has peak emotion, it has like, other, sort of like deep valleys of emotion, like negative emotion too, right? There's struggle, there's challenge, there's, and conflict. That's the way stories are. They go up and down, up and down, up and down.
100%.
That keeps engagement. If you are predictable, if you are, flatline, if you are using templates and scripts and you just go to any run of the mill and just say, oh, I'm going to put this in GPT, I can do this on my own. Well, you can, but you will look like everything else. And so
Yeah.
it's vital.
Yeah. So one piece of data out there that recently, we found was that of Indian nationals who submit EB1A petitions, only 32% are being approved, whereas the general population is 51% approval. I'm thankful and grateful that at Silmi Law we're above 90% approval.
Wow.
And I think, and what's interesting is we also take the hardest cases. Like people don't come because honestly, look, our fees are a lot higher. So if somebody has a relatively straightforward, or at least they think it's a straightforward case, they're not going to come to us. They're going to go somewhere where they could spend half the money or less. So, and one of the reasons I think for that outcome is that like we don't sort of have a situation where we're trying to like meet a particular or specific number of documents. For example, like a lot of people ask, if I give you this, is it enough? Or I've given you this, now do I have enough for my case to be submitted? And I always turn it around and ask, well, it's not really, have you given me enough? It's really, have you given me everything you possibly can? And have we then stopped and thought about whether there's more that could be given? And, and they get frustrated and they get mad. But it's like, this is the way to do it if you want to change your life. Like, we want to put you in a position where you don't have to worry about immigration for the rest of your life. It sucks that we have to go through this process, but it's hard. You have to reach out to people that you don't know. Like, one of the important things I emphasize is that one should have evidence not only from within their circle of professional acquaintances, but from outside of their circle of professional acquaintances. And that's a really hard thing to do. Like, to ask somebody to provide detailed testimony who you've never worked with and they've never worked with you, in order to demonstrate that you're recognized in the field. Like, how can one do this? How can someone, reach out to someone who's in their field? They might know of them, or, possibly they could have, been on a similar panel at some point in their lives, but like, really, there's no overlap. If I put their resumes side by side, we have no overlap. And that person should be a visible, kind of individual. They shouldn't just be like someone who's an entry-level person. So how can you just kind of give our folks some advice about how they can sort of reach out to such folks and individuals? Because that's a really, I think, stressful part of this process.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, especially because if somebody's reaching out and it's kind of like a so-called cold call, that it feels awkward on your end and it feels a little awkward on their end sometimes. And so one of the things is, if you're able to establish some sort of connection beyond, before that. So it might be on LinkedIn, it might be a few comments on things. If they're on a podcast somewhere or they are speaking somewhere, that you message them on LinkedIn or comment on a post that they're mentioned in, like, sort of just, start providing value, and not saying, hey, great talk. I mean, provide value. and so that's one thing, is if you are able to connect with them in other ways, via social media, etc., that could just fall by the wayside. But believe it or not, the more, there are times like, I don't know if you've ever scrolled through LinkedIn, and you're looking at, the people that you might know and should you connect with them. Sometimes there's a person that is staying there every time I scroll through, and I keep seeing their face, and I'm like, by the fifth or sixth, seventh time, I feel like I know them. Like, I should connect with them because I've seen them so many times. It's kind of bizarre that way. But anyway, you want to be present in that kind of way. The other thing is, don't assume that you have to reach out by doing something for them or that sort of thing. You could actually reach out and ask them and say, "Hey, I did XYZ thing. I'm wondering, could you just sneak a peek? Do you have any advice?" Right? If you ask someone for advice, there's this famous story, and actually, it's in
that's brilliant. I mean, I
yeah.
don't think. I mean, I've never thought about it. So rather than ask them for the favor of, hey, can you write me a letter to, support my EB1A case, you're just asking them for advice about their profession.
Yeah, and guess what? Most people want to do that. Like, what's really interesting? I told you, like, my path each year, I picked a different discipline to study from. Well, how I did it was I called up and I would say, don't use this language, but I would call up and say, look, this is a weird question, but I'm not weird. I'm going to ask. I'm wondering, can I just come see how you see the world? I'm a physician. I work in healthcare, but I really respect the work that you do, and I think there's value that I can bring back to patients and serving communities and things like that. So can I just come see how you see the world? Can I come under? So that was a cold call in a way, but it was to people who are experts, who, like, somebody who wrote a book, we might think, oh, they're untouchable. Guess what they want to talk about? They want to talk about their book.
Yeah.
Like, somebody calls up and asks them about it, like, they want to talk about it. Now, there are some people who are, so well known that it would be a harder call to make, but people generally want to have that kind of conversation.
So when do you go in for the ask? I mean, like, if you've sort of developed this rapport by maybe either complimenting or giving them value, or maybe asking them for advice regarding, career decisions, like, so you've done that and they've given you the advice, at what point, and how does it not become a transactional scenario? Like how do you end up really, getting this, like, high level person to, to sort of agree to it, besides maybe making it easy for them by, maybe helping them to sort of formulate the whatever it is that you need from them. But I'm wondering, because they're probably busy people that are not going to take a lot of time to do it, but how do you really go in and ask them after you've developed that rapport?
Yeah. So, well, two things. First, this is before. I know your question is after, but long before, you must not approach writing a comment, giving a compliment, giving them some value with yourself in mind. You absolutely must enter with a service, like, contribution sort of mindset, because I'm telling you, it comes out in your word choice, it comes out in your body language, it comes out in your voice, it comes out through and through. If you want something, if you're, I'll tell you, needy is not attractive. It's just not. Okay. And so if you're the one who grovels, the one who is needy, like, it just isn't attractive. Now, generally people want to help, but they don't want to help. I mean, I'm not saying everybody, but generally they don't want to help somebody who is in it for themselves. Like, so you have to cleanse that from your heart before you even start to try to reach out to somebody. It's really important that you're authentic, sincere. Contributing to the field is why you're reaching out. Contributing to serving through whatever your field is why you're reaching out, not because they have something I want and I'm going to get that. So that's the first point. Yeah. The second is, you may not actually ask them. See, a lot of things that influence are indirect. You may not ask them to do the thing. You may ask them if they know somebody that would. See, that might seem counterintuitive, But if you say, look, I'm you explain the EB1A process, or you explain all of that, you just sort of say, I'm in the process of trying to make this my home and be a citizen, and in order to do that, I have to establish my contribution to the field. Do you know anybody that might be willing to put mention a few lines,
Mhm. Or
attesting
take a look
to
at some of
my
my
country,
work and
look at some of my work, and just attest to the work.
mhm.
I'm not asking you to do something. You're right. So like that kind of way. So you can ask them directly. That's okay. But you can ask them also if they know someone else who might be willing to do it. And
Yeah.
then the best case scenario is they say, you know what, I would do that. Um, because and then they're choosing. It's not some feel like I need a shower because you're trying to get something from me. Like it's a little better that way. So those are some things you might want to consider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important because I think it's one thing that definitely shows, and you can't hide in a case. I mean, like, look, I can tell a story, I can, argue on behalf of my clients in a persuasive fashion at this point. But if I don't have the ammunition to do it, it's really difficult, And one thing I can tell you, the adjudicators can really see through the value, the qualitative value of a testimonial statement, and will see right away that, look, this is probably something from one of his buddies or her friends, versus being something that is qualitative and that is coming from a authoritative position within the person's specific area of endeavor or field. So that's really cool. Just there's a quick comment I want to address. So it says, do adjudicators perform their analysis based on age, opportunities, and accomplishments based on their age, or it's one criteria, difficulty? So the question is, are things relative in terms of age? And I guess that they're asking about EB1A. So I guess I'll just say, from a technical legal perspective, that the standards are such that one must demonstrate sustained national acclaim. So sustained acclaim means that it's not recent or present only, it's past, recent, present. But there's not really a length of time test that exists in the statute. So I think it could be relative to one's age, but it has to be sustained, meaning, and this is also another challenge. So I'd like your sort of insight on this, because most careers are a series of progressions, right? Like we start out somewhere and then we end up somewhere else. The For better or worse, the statute doesn't like that. I mean, they don't accept the idea that one has progress, or dramatic progress, at least. I mean, you must demonstrate sustained acclaim. It means that you've been in a level of acclaim for a sustained period of your career. So what sort of things can one do, maybe, and this could be some advice maybe for folks who are early on in their career, or folks on it throughout their career. Like what kind of things can they do to demonstrate sort of this sustained level of accomplishment?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, wherever you are, in any aspect of your career, there may be a level of acclaim that, for that level, right? So, for example, I mean, I can think of in the healthcare space, somebody who is a resident in medicine, they might be doing research, and they might be the third or fourth name on the publication, but they're actively engaging. And for somebody who is in their medical training and they have a certain number of publications, like that, is a level of acclaim for that level of their career. And then, sort of what would be expected of somebody a little further along. No one's expecting somebody to be the chair of a department the first 2 years into their career, right?
Yeah.
So where are you at that level? I don't know if that's easy for you to
Yeah,
demonstrate.
that's an interesting way to think about it. Like, for example, like, of all the individuals who have been in, let's say, medicine for
Mm.
3 years, like what sort of attributes do you possess, or what accomplishments do you have that are unique, or elevate you within that particular area of medicine that you practice, among all. And then it could be later on, like among folks like 7 years in, like this is generally where folks are and this is where I am. So that is actually an interesting way to go about solving that problem. So that's really cool.
And another thing I would say is wherever somebody intersects with another domain or discipline, there's often gold there. Like, so for example, I used to be very into the tech side of things. I mean, I still am, but I'm not a developer in any kind of way, shape, or form. But early on, I kind of was. And so I created some things that were like, I became the doctor that could talk to the coder, and the coder that could talk to the doctors. And when I was studying influence, I became the doctor who could talk to the marketers, and the marketers who could talk to the doctors. Now, there's a lot of pain points for marketers in health systems dealing with physicians. And so I could be that translator. I could be like, look, this is why we do it this way, this way, right? And so that allowed me through doors that others just don't walk through because of the intersection. So wherever you have an intersection, don't look at the field of people in your domain and think, I have to do what they do to get acclaim. You might stand out in another way, and that actually makes the story even more awesome.
Absolutely.
We have this doctor who learned how to make apps and made the code, did the coding for this, and created this thing. We have somebody who worked in this field and they brought it to this domain, right? Like, awesome story, because and it could say, oh, I had a claim at this level in this field and then brought this to another. Like, these stories are easy to tell. Like, so I would say keep an eye out for those.
No, absolutely. And so just a couple more comments here. So one person's asking how many recommendation letters are enough for a particular self-petition, right? And again, I think that when I always think about it, I think about the qualitative nature of documentation rather than the quantitative nature. So going back to that adjudicator and thinking about that adjudicator, like sitting there actually reviewing a petition, how do you sort of think, that one whose sort of role it is to judge written petitions would, look for in terms of, like quantitative versus qualitative, documentation. Like, I get there, because there's nothing in the statute that says you have to have this number of letters. I mean, clearly you'll need to demonstrate your past professional accomplishments through witness testimony in addition to existing documented evidence. And it's really important to have sort of folks who recognize your work, even though they haven't worked with you. But, what is sort of the difference, just maybe generally, and if you could kind of focus it on this, between quantitative and qualitative evidence or documentation?
So sometimes with fewer, you could still stand out in a big way, especially if either one of those letters is from somebody that's, recognizable in a big way. So there's that. The other is if you look, if you're from a specific country. I mean, you cited folks coming from India. If you're filing and you're trying to come, and your background is Indian, and all of your letter recommendations are coming from people who are Indian, that's not necessarily a problem, but it is a pattern, and it is something that people will judge. And so you may want to consider that, is there some way that actually the person that's writing the letter, they stand out, right? So do they interrupt the pattern, or are they creating a pattern? Oh, this is predictable. I've seen this one before. Here they are, 5 people, all similar backgrounds, all from even the same region, and like same provinces and same, like that is easily recognizable to someone who's seeing this day in and day out. And so I'm not saying this for anyone to manipulate this process in any way. I am just saying be really deliberate about who you're asking, because you could be setting up a pattern or you could be breaking it. And
I actually think the manipulation of the approach is what's leading to people submitting the same exact thing. Like, for
yeah,
example, people are paying a PR company to have an opportunity to judge work, right? So, like, I don't understand how that could demonstrate extraordinary ability. I mean, if I pay $500 to a private company for that private company to give me an opportunity to review something, and then they give me a tacky certificate for it. I mean,
mm,
if you
that's
think
just
the adjudication process is that bad, or like, I mean, it's not going to work. I mean, especially, like, I see people do this who are like, the VP of, like, engineering at, like, a major, I'm talking about major cutting edge, technology fintech company. And I'm just like, you're making $600,000 a year. Like, why the hell are you giving me, like, a piece of crap manufactured documentation? It's just going to pull you down into the, swamp of these, cases that are being, routinely rejected.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. So if there is a fundamental rule in influence that is more important than any other rule in influence, it is to manage your state, your emotions, your all these things, your authenticity, your energy. All of these things affect everything else, and one of those is your ethics. Your ethic. If you in any way, shape, or form cross a line where it ceases to be ethical, you like, if I'm a reviewer and I'm reviewing, this person looks awesome everywhere, and then they pull this thing, like, really? Like, I that you'll plummet. You
It's
will plummet.
exactly what
You will break. Like, there's one thing that will be really difficult to do, and that's to regain trust.
Mhm.
You need to be trustworthy first, and then bring forward the evidence and bring forward the stuff. Like, I know you really want to become a citizen and become part of the country, etc., and move here and all that stuff and be established here and establish your career in a big way. But if that comes out, like, it's just, and not only that, if you're okay with that, then what else are you okay with? And then
Mhm.
what will that do just by way of your career and all that other stuff? It can just have downstream consequences. I just say, like, stay far away from that.
Yeah, I 100% concur. I mean, yeah, and it's just a lot of misinformation. I don't think that folks really have sort of like an intent to want to, like, provide something that isn't, like, real or what have you.
Hmm.
I think, genuinely are misled by a lot of
Yeah.
misinformation that's out there, and, you know are sort of duped into these things. So, unfortunately, so that's something. And
And
um
that's why they should rely on expertise in this space. It's not,
indeed.
yeah, it's just it's a no-brainer. In fact, it doesn't even it's not even close. I mean, I don't know what your fees are, but I'll tell you, when it comes time to for an expert in this kind of space, it's a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer. They'll know things, they'll see things, they'll understand things that you just won't even be on your radar, and you just need to know. You just need to hire an expert.
Yeah.
It's
So
just like that.
I think that people who are interested in self petition,
Mhm.
EB1A, national interest waiver, or just generally, like, folks who are immigrants who have maybe even already acquired their green card and are sort of, trying to level up their careers, should rely upon your expertise, because I think it's excellent, and it's really important, and I think differentiates one from the crowd in ways that could help serve a lot of good and benefit. So, how could we kind of, learn more from you? I mean, uh, I'm signed up for your upcoming book club. I know that there's a book club coming up. So can you talk about that, and how we can get involved in that, and any other ways that, folks can benefit from you, and sort of, kind of use some of these things that I've sort of implemented in my own work, for themselves and their work and their families and their careers and whatnot.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate that. I really do. So I think there are a few points first. One thing about just generally, as the world is changing and changing fast, like technology, care models, business models, all these things are changing and they're changing fast. One of the things that I always encourage others to do is to get really good at what doesn't change. And there's something that doesn't change, and that is how to move people. So if you skill up at moving people, then it will help you with your family relations. It'll help you with your neighbors, your community. It'll help you with your career. It'll help you in this process, right? So skill up and influence, because as everything's changing, that doesn't. That is something that has remained for thousands of years, how to move people. So get really good at it. The other thing is, as the world, we're conducting this virtually. So there's virtual meetings, there's virtual reality, there's artificial intelligence. As the world becomes more virtual, more digital, more artificial, we're going to thirst and hunger for that one-on-one connection, that authentic connection. And so let's get really good at it. So generally, that's the premise behind it. And now, so the reason for me launching this that influence book club you talked about is because I found that I tend to get really eager when I hear a book or an interesting idea. I'll buy the course, I'll buy the book, and guess what? It'll sit there. I won't get to it. I have a pile of books. I have a pile of books on an Audible account. I have it in Kindle. I have it on my desk, right? And I won't get to them. And then the other side is if you've seen those apps that are out there, they give a summary or a few bullet points to summarize a book. Are you actually taking action on them? So the reason I launched the Influence Book Club is we go over a book each month, and you don't even have to read the book, but what I sort of deliver content in video form and certain take home type stuff that you can do, workshop, challenges and things like that. But you actually learn the skill and practice the skill. In fact, the books that are out there on influence and rapport and persuasion and things like that, some of them are incredible books, but their principles and all the things are just embedded in the pages and not actually implemented. You can implement these at the dinner table. You can implement them from the boardroom or from a presentation, and you can implement them, in your everyday meetings and your everyday work. So, so the Influence Book Club is something that November 1st is when we'll start sort of going bigger in it. And if you go to influencebookclub.com, or I think you also,
I think
have a link that
I think I had a QR code if I can figure out how to share it with all this fancy technology.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
There it is. There it is. Okay, so
there it is. So people can use the QR code, and there's also a link in the comments for the Influence Book Club. So that's very helpful. And then and then you also mentioned drtori.com. They could reach out to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I get all of the other applications that you mentioned. I'm honestly, selfishly, maybe that's against the rules of influence, but selfishly, wanting people to do this to make the petitions stronger and better, and I can have better evidence to use in my cases. Because one of the things I find, rather frustrating is that we're just, sometimes the most talented people are the ones who are less willing to sort of level up their petitions and their cases. And I just feel like if people, this stuff has application to every kind of, scenario that one is going through. So if let's say sometimes what happens with EB1A is a person's building their case over a period of time. It might be over 6 months, 8 months, a year, or even longer. So if one is building their case over the next 6 months or so, and they're engaging in the book club, I think that those sort of abilities that are sort of shared and attained will be really, really useful in not only acquiring evidence, but also thinking about how to approach their case to be substantive and to have qualitative aspects to it, with thinking outside the box and like you mentioned, interrupting the pattern. So that's one of the reasons why I really hope people can check out, the Influence Book
Yeah,
Club.
I mean, the other thing is in there we have sort of like group coaching calls where we sort of go over scenarios that people are facing, and so you sort of capture the wisdom of the group too, of other people who have either read the books or watched the videos. That and you don't even have to have read the book. You could just consume the videos to go through it. But I really do think it serves you through that entire process, and then also in the career beyond that, right? Like it's just it will make you a better a better human as you serve in the way that you do whatever your expertise is.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I cannot thank you enough for taking your time out to join me here
Yeah.
and to sort of put this out there for folks. I tried to join the chat, but for some reason I couldn't. But I wanted to respond to one person out there, Freelance Master. He says he's less than 18 years old and wants to do an EB1A. Man, if you put up a decent argument or whatever, or even have a one pager about why you qualify for EB1A, email it to me and I'll give you a free consultation. All right. If you're 18 years old and thinking about EB1A, mad respect to you. Check me out, sillmelaw.com, and I'll take care of you. So that was pretty cool. And then just thank you again. I think it's really a pleasure, and hopefully folks out there got a lot of good information that they could kind of think about to level up the approaches that we all need to take to put themselves in a better position and their families as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was a great discussion.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.